Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be reading Rslash, Let's Not Meet. Our first post, scary bus creep followed me home at night. Back when I was attending a university, I used to work on campus at one of the dining halls, during the dinner/night shift. I lived in the next town over, since it was cheaper to live in a crappy little apartment out of town than to live on campus in the dorms. But I didn't own a car, so I had to take the bus. One night I just gotten off a shift at work. My feet were killing me and I was completely exhausted. As I slowly made my way to the bus stop, I noticed a man much older than me sitting on one of the two benches at the otherwise empty bus stop. But I didn't pay too much attention to him. I simply sat down on the second bench. I listened to some music while waiting for the bus to arrive. The first sign that things were starting to get weird was when I kept noticing out of the corner of my eye he was staring at me. At first I thought I might be imagining it, so I looked over and caught him quickly turning his head to look away. Okay, he was staring at me. This wasn't completely out of the ordinary, since being a young college girl seemed to give me a lot of attention from older men. So like usual, I just ignored him. That was a mistake. Again, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him look at me. But instead of just staring this time, he got up and walked over to sit next to me instead. I continued listening to my music, hoping he'd see the earbuds and take the hint that I wasn't interested in the conversation. Instead, this man literally took the earbud out of my ear. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said as my head snapped to look at him in shock. I should have told him off for touching my things and demanded he leave me alone. But I was sort of frozen and didn't want to make him mad. Hi? I responded quietly. He started introducing himself as Mike, telling me he lived in the area and it was always nice to see pretty girls like me at the university bus stop. He explained that he was a real man, unlike the boys I went to school with, and that I should go home with him that night. I was a shy, scared virgin who never had a man be as bold as this to my face. I say to my face because I had certainly got my fair share of unsolicited private pictures online by that point. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. But that didn't stop Mike from continuing to explain to me all the fun things he wanted to do. He got into graphic detail. The things he described started out with basic things you'd expect, and escalated to him asking if I liked being choked until I turned purple and passed out in bed. I wish there was anyone else at the bus stop, but it was just the two of us, in the dark alone. As I counted the seconds until the bus would arrive. Then Mike took things to a different level of shocking by telling me, "Listen, the demons want me to ask for your phone number, and they say you should give it to me or you won't like what happens." He actually had the audacity to start stroking my hair. His hand was gentle, but I didn't want him touching me at all. This was shocking for a number of reasons. The demons? I wouldn't like what would happen? Why was he touching me? What the hell is this guy talking about? As though he could read through my mind, Mike went on to explain. "My therapist knows the demons are real. I told her about them and she says I'm not crazy and the demons are real." He laughed, then abruptly stopped. "Now give me your phone number like they said," he demanded as he stroked my hair for the last time. He stopped and gripped the back of my neck, still gentle but even more terrifying. I was scared and obviously didn't want him to have my phone number. But he was taking out his phone and I knew he was going to call the number I gave him to make sure I wasn't lying to him. And he still had his hand on the back of my neck, so I reluctantly gave him my real phone number. Stupid, I know, but I was right and he immediately called to check. All I could think about was just not making this guy angry long enough to get away from him, then I'd block his number. Thankfully, the bus came moments later. I sat down as close to the front of the bus near the bus driver as I possibly could. Mike decided to sit directly across from me. At this point, I tried listening to music again, hoping that being on the bus and him having my phone number would signal to him the end of our conversation. However, he decided to reach over and unzip my sweatshirt, revealing my work shirt and the name tag, which I unfortunately forgot to remove in my state of haste to leave work that night. Abigail, what a beautiful name. Our daughter will be Celeste. I shouldn't have been shocked at this point, but I was. I had stopped listening to music again and zipped my sweatshirt back up, which made him laugh. "You won't need that soon anyways," he said and winked at me, implying how he planned to undress me even further that night. At one stop, Mike tried to convince me to get off the bus with him. I told him no, that I was tired and just wanted to go home. So he said okay and stayed on the bus. I knew that had been a stop, so the fact that he was staying on the bus worried me. I was sure this meant he was planning on coming home with me instead. "Baby," Mike whispered to me. I tried to ignore him, but he repeated himself louder. "Baby." He'd had the most unsettling smile on his face as I asked, "What?" He laughed and told me, "The demons say you smell nice." I was terrified and felt like I was going to throw up by the time my bus stop arrived. I lived in an apartment alone and didn't want him knowing where I lived. Despite my body being exhausted and sore from work, adrenaline clicked in and I bolted off the bus and ran straight home. I made it inside and locked the door. I looked through the peephole and didn't see him, so I carefully peeked out of my window and saw him near the bus stop looking around. He took out his phone and sure enough I started getting a call from an unknown number since I hadn't saved his number. I ignored it. When he hung up, I started getting several texts asking where I'd gone, how he didn't like hide and seek, how the demons wanted to have fun but I was being a little bitch about it. I was so scared because he knew which apartment building I lived in, where I worked, where I went to school, my phone number, and my name. The only good thing which made me feel slightly relieved was that he didn't know which specific apartment number I lived in. That's when he started yelling outside. There was no specific words said, just wordless yells of what I can only assume were frustration and anger. I blocked his number and kept all the lights in my apartment off as I cried with my back to the front door. Maybe I should have called the police, but my brain was so frazzled that I didn't even think about it until the next day. And by then, all I knew about him was he was a mentally unstable man, probably named Mike, who hadn't actually done any physical harm to me, so I didn't think it was worth it. In hindsight, I know I made a lot of stupid mistakes during this experience. I ended up moving away entirely at the end of that term of school for unrelated reasons. But until then, I switched to day shifts at work and was paranoid every night. Thankfully, I never saw that man again. So Mike, the scary guy from the bus stop who tried to follow me home, I never want to meet you or your demons ever again. Being a girl on World of Warcraft. As a female who's been on the game for 15 years now, I've met a load of creeps, but only a few only made me feel unsafe. To start off, I've had a laptop since I was in high school, a luxury back when I worked hard enough to buy one. My mom almost took my money I earned for drugs, but luckily the money I made in tips were in cash, so it was easier to hide from her. At first, my mom was mad I bought myself a laptop, but she soon forgot like everything. My dad could care less, and my older brother already had his own. So I started playing World of Warcraft with him at 14, and back then girls were unheard of. So I got the usual creeps who backed off after hearing my age, or they were young too. But not this guy. This guy loved that I was underage. I was about 16 and used to creepy guys at this point. No longer a noob at the game or fending off creeps, it was no surprise a new guy in the guild started hitting on me. Now I was 16, dumb, young, horny, and stupid. But yes, I knew I wasn't gonna find love on World of Warcraft, where you knew no one in real life. Plus I had the ultimate crush on a guy I couldn't have, because he was my brother's best friend. But in my mind, back then, I only wanted him. So it was easy to turn guys down despite being desperate as hell for one guy. But that all changed after my brother's friend went off to college. I had a part-time job with my brother's friend, but girls at work surrounded him, and I became demoralized that I'd never find love. Cue a 19-year-old guy in World of Warcraft who made me feel wanted. I had a camera phone so I could send and post pictures at that age. And back then I mostly used Facebook, MySpace, and PhotoBucket. I lost a lot of weight my sophomore year, so I confidently posted bikini pics and sexy pictures thinking I lured the attention of my brother's friend, whom was 19. So when this guy who was also 19 liked me, it didn't faze me. He looked the part in his photos, and his younger brother was my age. So I thought, he was extremely attractive in his photos and even proved it was him in his pictures by holding items I asked for. He started paying for my WoW subscription, which in the long run I realized was to get my home address and real name. I was so stupid and heartbroken over my brother's friend. Years of teaching myself online safety and the ability to be strong against flirts was all but lost in the fog. We talked for hours, and he made me feel pretty. I was completely blinded by this point. He sent me gifts, and I didn't even question how he got my address. Then he offered to drive and pick me up. Only then did I suddenly get cold feet. I had a good friend on WoW, someone my brother met at PAX and joined the guild and is still one of my best friends to this day, though we both aren't fond of my older brother. He's 6 years older than me, but has never creeped on me. Was more like a protective brother I lacked. Well, at least till I was 24, and single for the first time did we hook up, lol. But that's because we were friends for so long. But the distance led to it not turning into a relationship. He caught on to it through conversation. It was my words of wisdom in a time I was lacking my own. He saw something fishy when I couldn't. I told my friend I was scared to meet him because, dumb teenager logic, I thought he would not like me. My friend chimed in that I shouldn't meet anyone off the internet at my age. I told him about the gifts, and I swear I'd never been scolded like this in my life, not even by my own parents. But he always cared like that. He wondered why I'd give my address to someone I'd never met, and the expensive gifts I got were not something the average 19-year-old could afford. None of this ever clicked for me, of course, because I was lonely and trying to prove to myself or my crush or something I could get a boyfriend. Like that, I told the guy it wasn't wise to meet in person, and my parents said I wasn't allowed to. That's when it went dark. At first it was pestering over and over, guilting me over the gifts he gave me and encouraging me to defy my parents. While he kept bothering me, it never once occurred to me that he'd lose his shit. While my friend was worried shitless about the guy having my address, going as far to drive the 11 hours to my house and explain the situation to my dad, as I refused to tell him out of fear of getting in trouble at the time, all while taking his spring break in my state instead of going with his friends. There's a reason he's still one of my best friends. He's a little sister of his own as well, and she's my age, so his protective nature is natural. Eventually, he made me block the guy, and that was that. This guy was pissed off. He'd go on different accounts to accuse me of gold digging and using him. Luckily, my friend was smart enough and had the foresight to change my password, and even paid for my account for me, taking this guy off it entirely, as one of the guy's threats was to delete my account. But it didn't end there. It got worse as he consistently found ways to message me and tell me how horrible I was, till about a month had passed. I was walking home from school, about a 2-mile walk in wealthy suburbs of New England, which I had done for years. Many kids did, as it was a safe town with no crime in it or surrounding towns. Without a second thought, I took off my backpack, put in my earphones, and started my 20-minute walk home. It was so cold I had my earmuffs over my headphones, only drowning out the sound more. I swear if I could talk to myself as a kid, I'd probably just slap myself for stupidity, because Wow Guy knew I walked home every day as I talked about it. He knew my address, and I never thought twice. I was on the back roads walking home, and honestly easy to map from my school to my home as it was pretty straightforward with only one turn. At halfway home, in between songs, I heard a vague crunching sound of tires rolling over gravel of the road slowly. I turned around to see a tinted black car, that you couldn't see much of a person in the front. I jogged out of the driveway I was standing in, assuming it was waiting to turn in, but it didn't turn in. The roads were dead, and it didn't make much sense for him not to go around. I swear the saying you go cold when you're terrified is absolutely true. It could have been summers of 95 degrees and my bones would have been cold. My heart just sank and my breathing was uncontrollable. I felt like I had no control over my body as I realized this guy was following me. My blood truly ran cold and my hands shook as tears formed and my skin felt tight. My body felt like it wasn't ready to fight or flight, but simply freeze there and die. It only got worse the second time. I turned my head to see the car stop. I stopped. My world stopped. I couldn't stop staring, just froze and breathing like all my school books were on my chest. Crying silently, my eyes hurt with no tears or sound. I just stood there. The door opened after what felt like hours, but only seconds, probably a minute. And it was in fact him. It was the attractive guy from the photos. Not a catfish, but something seemed different. At first I thought it was his angry expression, but soon realized he was definitely not 19, more like 30 plus. I could barely think over the loud sound of my heart racing as it froze me in place. I thought I was going to throw up as he spoke to me. Told me to get in the car or he'd light my house on fire and kill my dog in front of me. I honestly just couldn't move. Couldn't reach for my phone as his words froze me. And like magic, we both failed to notice the little old lady on her porch, watching this play out. Suddenly I hear her yell, "Get away from that girl right now before I burn you alive!" Damn, old lady, I'm here for it. We both turned to meet her eyes. Pissed off small lady about 60 or 70 with white hair. I think she noticed my frozen in fear state as she told me to get over to her quickly. Like that, I ran over to her, tossing off my heavy brick of a backpack. It was obvious he was unsure what to do next, as he stood there and watched me run to her. It must have been a sight to see this teeny old lady standing in front of a teenage girl yelling at a man to go away. Like that, Savior number 2 joined the battle as her husband stepped out. Guy who looked like he'd been through a war or two, with a shotgun of all things and booming voice. Guy pointed saying, "I've shot and killed men for less reason, you better leave now." He got into his car and drove off as I simply collapsed. All that fear just came out and I cried harder and harder as my brain shifted through the past months of mistakes. After calming me down enough to speak, she asked if I knew him. I told her kinda, but only online from a video game, not real life. Of course, explaining it wasn't easy, and her husband couldn't grasp why I wanted to print it I was at war. I'm sure his experience was thinking of Call of Duty, not magical creatures in a game called World of Warcraft. She got on the phone with the school counselor, her daughter apparently, and told her my name. I was well known to the daughter, ironically, but it was only 250 or less kids in the school, and the town itself was small. Many staff at our school had family in town. Kids at school that they were related to either by their own children or their siblings' children. It was the kind of town you didn't leave by a certain age, you were stuck. So honestly, it seemed ironic, but not a huge surprise. The counselor was well aware of my family, and my mom's drug addiction as child services had been involved a few times. She came in 10 minutes to pick me up and asked me a ton of questions, of course knowing I didn't want to involve police as I was scared to be taken away from my parents again. Foster care was worse than a drugged-out mom on prescriptions. We weren't rich, but we were more well-off than many. Though my mom worked, my dad kept my mom on a tight budget to keep her from buying prescriptions from Canada. She wasn't prescribed, hence her trying to take my money. She knew all of this, and knew, though rough, I was better off than foster care, which is a gamble with losing odds at best. Plus 2 more years and I'd be off to college anyways. So it didn't involve the cops, but she made me promise to take the bus every day and to inform my dad of my situation. She also called my dad at work to inform him, and had a teacher make sure I got on the bus every day till I graduated. Really sucked, but I understood. If it ended there, it would have been nice, but there's a bit more. 2 days after this, my dad had to fly out for business. My brother was off at college, so it left me and my high mom, who promised my dad she would stay sober while he was gone, but I was used to helping her while high. It was like taking care of a child. But I was on edge as ever. Creek in that big house from the 60s, cats stare at night, dogs barking outside set me off. I barely slept. My friend from WoW called every night making sure I was okay for the past month. I lived in the middle of the woods, next to a huge river in my backyard, so there was still a lot of wildlife outside in the dead silence of cold months. Running water is an important source of water when lakes freeze. I'd been used to all the bumps in the night, cats coming and going, and dogs barking at every animal in the yard. But it all seemed new to me as I laid in bed trying to drown my fears. The house I grew up in was a 6-bedroom house, but she stayed with my grandma in another state, pure court order, while I was allowed to choose due to her only being 9 and me being 16. The other rooms were used as a game room, office for my dad, and guest room mostly for when my sister visited. My grandma and her had a room. So in a large room like that in the middle of the woods, it was scary to virtually be alone because my mom accounted for defenseless. I was letting my last cat inside for the night, 5 who we all knew to come in at night for dinner and stayed till morning. And at the end of the long driveway between my neighbor and our house was parked a black car. I quickly shut the door and locked it after my cat got inside. I made sure all 5 doors were locked and even put a cardboard in the glass window. To the pool, I don't know, hoping if he broke them it would delay it. Hoping if he broke them it would delay him, if that car was his. I went and turned off all the lights, got all my cats in one room so I knew they were safe. Here's the thing about my dog. He's untrained for the most part, but basically a giant lap puppy in his mind. He growled at strangers, not barked like at animals. We had to keep him outside if we had guests, but he never bit anyone, and if you spent enough time around him, he'd eventually accept you. Also, he didn't growl at all strangers either, so he wasn't the most reliable guard dog either, but he was big and deep bark. I mulled over what to do as I sat in the dark with my dog, waiting for the shadow to pass by the window. I eventually went upstairs to my mom's room and woke her up from her sleeping pill summer. Groggy and still kinda high, she didn't quite gasp what I was telling her till I started crying. She sort of sobered up and asked me to get some coffee, and I did, all while I'm watching my dog's every move because I knew he could sense something before I did. As my mom sobered up, the fear in her eyes grew. Eventually, she got the idea to call my neighbors and ask them if they knew the car. After all said no, 2 of the men went to their house to check the car together. The car was empty. At closer inspection, though, they noticed it was a newer car, a Lexus, and in the passenger seat was a laptop. The car was locked, but with a flashlight you could see somewhere into the tinted windows. They never told us why, but something they saw in the car prompted them to call the local sheriff. Only one, and he lived in town sort of thing. We were too small to have a police department. He drove about 15 minutes later, ran the plates, and asked the houses around about it. Apparently it was a rental car from Idaho, and he was calling to see who rented it, but the offices were closed, I think. He stuck around in his car for about an hour, till someone came out of the woods, and ran back in as the cop turned his spotlight on him. I couldn't see what he was pointing at with his light, as it was the side of my house, and I was looking at the front. I guess he called for backup as 3 other cop cars showed in 5 minutes, the neighboring town/highway patrol, at which a lady cop got out and I was asked to speak with her, and called my counselor at school to explain who that might be. I was pretty shy back then, but I don't know, something about a female cop made me feel more comfortable to open up. I told her the gist of the story. Then she called my counselor who backed up my story, but also explaining why I was scared of cops because of my history of foster care and not wanting to go back, at which a mostly sober mom joined in hugging me, doing her typical apologetic routine, but also offering much needed comfort as she called my dad too. Eventually the lady cop asked if she could take a look around the house, to see if things were secure and to get any information from my laptop about him. In her search, she found something I didn't think about checking. The basement door was not just unlocked, but open. It's never unlocked, so I didn't even think to check it, as our backyard floods in spring due to beaver dams, and it's got extra seals and stuff to prevent the basement from flooding. Again, the stuff was sealing it, which was mostly sandbags and stuff, were set aside, but the door at the bottom of the stairs was locked. Still though, it had some damage like someone tried picking it, but he had access to half the basement that was storage. Basement was sectioned, and the other half used to be used for my brother's parties. The door between sections was like a front door, not an indoor door. As in the summer, my dad left the hatch open to dry out the basement, and adjust pool settings as it was basically the pool house. The cats loved it, so it also had a few cat beds. The section that led upstairs was locked from the inside, and the wall and the door were not drywall, and cheap door but lock and heavy key door, and wall was brick. Upon noticing this, my dad confirmed he had not left it open. My suspicions that the black car was his was pretty much confirmed. As we walked through the house to make sure everything was still safe, she got on my laptop as they searched the woods. I gave her everything I had, his photos, username, and she even checked to see if his credit card was still on my account, but it wasn't. But since the last few digits were, she asked to take my laptop for a few days as she thought she could get some good evidence from it. I asked her please do not damage it and return it as soon as possible, because I used it a lot. Before smartphones, it was all I had. A few hours on onlooking, neighbors had gone to bed. The cops had came back empty-handed but left a cop outside our house and towed the guy's car. From what the lady cop told me, what permitted such fear was the car had 2 guns, some rope and handcuffs, and the guy who ran back in the dense woods was wearing a winter ski mask. Not out of season but suspicious nonetheless. So I eventually tried to lay down and go to sleep, but I was pretty sure I was going to call out sick tomorrow and kept all my cats inside for the day. I was too restless to sleep. Every sound made me so scared. My mom slept with the dog in her room. I'm very allergic to animals, but less to cats, so I kinda build up the tolerance to the cats but not dogs. And cats slept in my room most nights, by choice as my room was usually the warmest. At 3:30 a.m.-ish, I heard a knock on the back door. A guy say, "Undercover police officer, open up." I was still awake as I walked downstairs to make out a guy standing in the dark with a gun. As he saw me, he demanded I let him in now as he needed to speak with me. Something felt off. My gut knew it. Before I did that, this guy's voice seemed forced, like someone purposely making their voice deeper. And why was he at the back door? So I turned on a light outside, and sure enough, it was him. As quickly as I screamed, he started hitting on the door hard. It wasn't a very loud horror movie scream, more like a gas scream. I don't think the fear in my body had a loud scream to let out, but the banging was pretty loud. As I ran to the front door to see if the officer was still outside. He was, but he wasn't getting out of his car. I didn't want to run outside as I'm not a fast runner, so I turned the porch lights on and off a couple times, but still nothing. After a minute, my dog came bolting down the door and barking and growling, nearly foaming at the mouth. Soon my mom followed, yelling she had a gun. She didn't, but bluff is bluff. Somehow during all this time, the cop outside had snuck around the back and had his gun pointing at him, yelling him to put his gun down. I hid as the rest went down, but he was arrested. No trial needed me to attend, and my statement was enough. Come to find out, he wasn't even American. The car he rented was under his friend's name, and after all was done, he was deported back to Canada. I assumed something with his passport would have prevented him from coming back to the USA, as the cop reassured me he couldn't come back to the USA now. I don't know exactly what he was charged with, but I think my dad said aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, attempted kidnapping, and something else. Also, and it turned out to be he was 32 years old, not 19. So I assumed me being a minor carried a charge. And then life moved on from there. I had plenty of creeps before and after, but he was the worst from WoW. I had a couple from streaming, but I was adult and much better safing online community. Only one worse than this guy was my ex-boyfriend's cousin, who made my life hell for a couple years, but that's another story for another time. That was a long, intense story. Thanks for watching the video. Make sure to send OP some support, and have a great day.